Hi, I'm Tony Shaffer, the president of the London Center for Policy Research, and this is our Thought to Action podcast. This is our regular series of podcasts that cover the spectrum of things the London Center for Policy Research works on. Everything from energy, national security, technology, policies relating to the Bill of Rights, and everything that serves to function as the foundation of our republic. Please look for us on thoughttoactionpodcast.com, Thought to Action Podcast TV. We're on iTunes, and anything you can do to help us by liking, subscribing, commenting would be appreciated. Today, we'll be talking with one of our senior fellows who's most active in the think tank, who has been the partner of our late President, Dr. Herb London, in a number of his works relating to publications. I'll let him go through them and tell you a bit more about each one. But the most important thing we'll be talking about today is youth. And I think that's something that we tend to not fully appreciate at this point, is the need to educate, not own, but educate those who are perhaps more progressive than we like to be on the conservative side, who are young, who are in the youth. So, Brian, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me today. And please tell us a little bit about the work you've done with Dr. London and what your perspective is on our discussion point today.
Thanks for having me, Tony. Glad to be here and really happy about the launch of this podcast and the topics that we're covering. I met Dr. London all the way back in 2014 when I was a student at the University of Columbia, and I was living in New York City, and he, as gracious and as kind as ever, invited me in to get to know me and also talk about the work of the London Center, and immediately I felt like it was home for me. Since that point, or from that point on, Dr. London and I worked closely on a number of projects, including I authored the Encyclopedia of Militant Islam. I helped lead the research team on the BDS War Against Israel, a handbook about the BDS ongoing situation. And then I also helped pull together Dr. London's anthology, Leading from Behind, an analysis of the foreign policy decisions of the Obama administration.
And now you're working on a new publication regarding his life.
That's right. The Life and Legacy of Dr. London. That's just a working title, but there's a lot to be said. And he was just a great man. So grateful for his mentorship and his the way that he led not only the London Center, but the way that he led, I think, a lot of thought in this arena. And one of the things that was most important to him was making the case to millennials and younger that conservative ideologies can better accomplish the things that they care about than liberal big government ideologies. And I tend to agree with him.
Yeah. So that's a great segue. It pulls it all together. And I think this is where I've spent some time this morning thinking about this interview and what we'd be talking about. And I'll just put it right out there because my observations, tell me if you think I'm wrong, is that so much of the millennial segment of our population has been taught to interpret their feelings as facts and act as such. Would you agree with that assessment? And if so, how do we overcome that?
Well, that's right. I think, unfortunately, there's good and bad parts of the modern world. And one of the bad parts about the modern world and constantly being online is you're living in a bubble, right? Mm-hmm. You're living in a bubble of just those people that you can see on your feed. And your anecdotes become more important to you than perhaps the statistics or facts surrounding an issue. So your emotions are able to well up to the point where they become your guiding philosophy in any type of policy or size of government. For example, if you see somebody that that is having problems, for example, receiving medical care, that anecdote tends to lead people to think, well, then we have to do something about this immediately, and something should be done through government because that's the most immediate answer that's being put out there, or at least the simplest answer that's being put out there, instead of something that could actually be more sustainable, like a free market policy or charities that they may or may not know about. I mean, everybody knows about the government and what it has to offer, so sometimes, unfortunately, I just think it's what's readily in front of millennials when they're making decisions about the ideologies that they hold.
Well, I think that's the key. I mean, I think there's a story of Milton Friedman going to China and looking at one of the Chinese dam building projects. And he asked the Chinese why they're not using modern technology? And the Chinese answer, well, because they're using shovels and things like that. He says, well,
Right.
we want to make it a civil work program. He says, well, if it's a civil work program, give everybody spoons so you can get everybody completely involved. Why just limit the shovels? Really make it difficult. And I think that's this what I see here. The
Right.
millennials tend to make things difficult because they're actually looking at how do we get involved, rather how do we become effective? How do we do something effectively?
Right.
And I think they've been brainwashed by the left to think that these big government programs who are going to provide everything for everyone, like the Chinese saying, oh yeah, this is a civil works program, let's get everybody out there with shovels, don't understand that simply having the government involved in doing something is not going to result in any solution for them. And how do you make that point? Because the system it seems is so left-wing in academia that it's hard to get people to do critical thinking at this point. And I would argue, let me throw one more thing in there. Once you get to the point where you're a graduate, it's almost hardwired in there. So
Right.
How do you get past that?
Well, you know what? You're absolutely right. And we're not just making this up, that millennials tend to believe this way. In fact, I brought a couple statistics today just to add to the conversation. I'll go through these and then I'll address your point. According to the most recent American Institutional Confidence Poll, over half of 18 to 29-year-olds are unsatisfied with American democracy, and over 20% would prefer to see the system replaced with a non-democratic system. In the 2019 Victim of Communism's annual report towards socialism, communism, and collectivism, 70% of American millennials say they are likely to vote socialist. Only 57% of American millennials believe the Declaration of Independence better guarantees freedom and equality over Marx's Communist Manifesto. Only 1 in 2 millennials have a favorable view of capitalism, and 1/5 of all millennials believe society would be better if all private property was abolished. Alarming statistics, and I think what's going on is what you're talking about. There's a certain ideology that has pervaded institutes of higher learning. I think it comes back to this idea that what is the easiest solution for us to be involved in, right? And I don't want to, I'm not trying to trash my peers and people who are just coming into the political world. I think that they have good intentions of wanting to be involved on behalf of charitable and humanitarian domestic issues. The problem is that the issue that seems to be most easily attained, or excuse me, the solution that seems most easily attained, is just to make government big enough to meet all of the needs that are presented to them throughout their time in institutions of academia. And that we know that it doesn't work out. Government being bigger does not create a sustainable or more effective solutions to healthcare, poverty, or any other solution that may be at the heart and mind of millennial focus.
Well, that's the thing. And again, this goes back to my original posit of treating feelings as facts. Your feelings may be something that you have to deal with, but they don't result in positive outcomes as it relates to how you get a job, how you deal with others. And to that point, if you look at comparative political, I'm a political scientist. I've looked at comparative political systems growing up. Right. And it's very clear to me that if you actually look at the Soviet system or the Chinese system, right, it's very inefficient. It doesn't guarantee you anything. And to quote Animal Farm, all animals are created equal, but some animals are created more equal than others. So how do you kind of like get them to understand that this is a fake? This is a panacea that will never be had, never is possible. How do you deal with that?
I think the argument has to be made in the priority structure that is important to millennials right now, using terms and things that are important to them, for example. And I think in almost every case, any topic you can bring up, I can tell you that the free market and or private solutions can accomplish something better than the government. Right. But if you talk in terms of, let's say, human rights, look at the biggest governments in the world. China, worst human rights records in modern society.
Right.
I'm surprised.
Modern concentration camps. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. So, how does we have to make the case that the correlation between the size of government and decrease in human rights is absolutely positive. Environmentalism, the worst track records on environmentalism, which is an important topic to many millennials, are big governments, because they
Right.
can get away with things. They can prioritize what is and what isn't environmentally friendly instead of an open source, free market, consumer-led solution.
Right.
We know that healthcare is reduces in quality and reduces in access when you provide it through government, because government is not designed to maintain a service, and they just
Yep.
aren't equipped, they aren't big enough, and they aren't accountable enough to be able to maintain a service for an entire citizenry, especially one the size of the United States population. So
Well, I'm
I think
with you.
fair
Right.
terms.
And on that point, my other degree is environmental studies, and on that
Mhm.
point, we could reduce to zero emissions of CO2, and you know how much impact that would have on the world?
Right.
Nothing, because we aren't the biggest producer. All the developing world, some of those being China, India, and folks in that part of the world are developing and using far
Right.
more resources than we are inefficiently. So it's not
Right.
even about us. And so to that point, it's like us doing this means absolutely nothing. And another point I want to bring forward, and we have to wrap up here. For anybody who really believes socialism works and communism works, they ought to go no further than to review what happened in Cambodia under the Pol
Right.
Pot regime,
Right.
where a leadership team of communists decided we don't want intellectuals because they will help make our society unfair.
Right.
It's all about fairness. And I think that's the point. Communism, socialism is not about expanding success. It's about bringing everybody down to a common level.
Tony, your example hits very close to home. When I was at Columbia, my thesis project was actually in Cambodia. And I remember I
Wow.
was designed to go, our thesis went to Cambodia, went out to rural parts of Cambodia and speak to citizens there about what they went through under Pol Pot and how they're trying to reach into their government now to be part of it. And I remember hearing stories from people about their older family members were killed simply because they had glasses, simply because they were intelligent or they had an education. I mean, the idea there is that no one can have the ability to have differing thoughts or opinions. And all of this was done under the guise of making a more fair society. All of this was done under the guise of a society that would include more benefits for people. And it was all a ruse. It was all a ruse for power. And that potential is the potential that every big government carries. And that's why it's so important that we make sure that we are opening the field of solutions to problems that society faces. Grassroots, localized efforts at healthcare, environmentalism, poverty, all of these things should be part of the solution, if not the primary solution, to the main ills of society.
Yeah. But again, not done by through a government-centric or government-directed point of view. This should come from the commercial sector
Right.
with innovation and, dare I say, capitalism, not
Right.
communism.
That's
And
right.
again, I don't know how we have not done a good job of telling the youth of that, the millennials. But Brian, I hope you will lead us in the way Herb had originally intended, to create the circumstance for an academic center of excellence within the London Center to expand both the education and understanding of folks on this point. So
Yeah.
I thank you for being here today, and we'll continue this conversation. Obviously, this is far bigger than what we can cover in 15 to 20 minutes, but please continue the work on the Dr. London book, and we'll come back and talk to you about the progress on that as soon as that's ready to go as well.
Well, thanks for having me, Tony. It's an important topic, and I'm glad to be part of the effort to help my peers shed some of the things that they've been convinced of that I think are not factually based.
Yeah, well, thank you. So, and then for the audience, thank you all for being here today again. Again, we're on Patreon. We're on thoughttoactionpodcast.com, Thought to Action Podcast TV. And we also have now a Patreon program. So for those of you who like our content, want to see more of it, we appreciate your support. Plus, you'll get early access to some of the stuff we're doing, exclusive access. So you can look for to support us via Patreon and patreon.com /thought to action. So thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to having you all join us again for another London Center Thought to Action podcast. I'm Tony Shaffer, President, and look forward to seeing you all very soon.